This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Lauri Markkanen discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It's a wild, wild world we're living in. And if you're out of Utah, that just means that you are normal as awesomely as you would love to be. What a great story for us to be discussing with the way that the NBA has been playing itself out. I mean, Cleveland Cavaliers, among the best teams in the NBA. Utah Jazz, among one of the best teams in the NBA. Who'd have thunk it? I'm sorry, I can't make sense of it. So I'm going to make sure I roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man's www.shawsports.net. Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Shaw, working out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Soon to make an exodus to New York City in a little bit. What's good, my man? You ready for your excursion up here to be splurging in the NY?
Well, I would hope so. If this damn, subtropical storm, whatever the hell that is, Nicole, coming here and trying to put her roots on the trip, man. So hopefully I'll be able to fly up out of this piece, join you and my other brother up there in NYC, and just do some family stuff as well. But for the short term, we got to get this podcast in here. There's money to make, conversations to be had, and a great guest to get to as always.
Absolutely, man. Like, so much has been happening, so much going on right now in the association, and I'm glad we're back to our focus, which is what's happening out there on the basketball court, because there's really some exciting and elevated play. And one of the teams who is leading the charge, so to speak, in regards to that elevated type of play is the Utah Jazz. I mean, among one of the best teams coming out of the Western Conference out the gate with as we're recording this show, with a 9-3 record, man. I mean, Jesus, man, they have a better record than the defending champion Golden State Warriors. And I don't think anybody in their right frame of mind, unless they were smoking the bong, would have probably been saying to themselves that the Utah Jazz will be one of the best teams coming out of the gate right now. But we have a special guest on board to help us really kind of fine-tune the logic. You know what I'm saying? Because clearly we'd be talking crazy. So he's going to help inject a little bit of logic as to why that is the case. Or maybe he won't. Maybe he's as shell-shocked as we are. But we got our man, Eric Walden, who covers the Utah Jazz. He's going to be coming on board in a little bit in our segment of the breakdown in order to talk about why the Utah Jazz are among one of the best teams right now and whether or not they can sustain that for the remainder of the regular season. As always, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFaceLee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. You know where to find us. Just put Baseline in on your search. Once we come up, just add us on, and you can catch us and all of our episodes for your listening pleasure. If you want to catch our previous episodes, you can simply go to www.thebaselinenba.com. That's the home site. And as always, we roll with the 19 Media Group. The 19 Media Group, we run in these content streets. So whenever you want to listen to either us or some of the great shows that we've got with some great personalities, with great content and great storylines to discuss, go to www.the19mediagroup.com, and we will definitely hook you up for your listening pleasure. So you know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's talk Utah Jazz with our special guest, Eric Walden, here on The Breakdown.
Time to break it down to the bone gristle.
Time now for The Breakdown. Lauri Markkanen, the Baseline NBA podcast. And on with us this week, and we are really excited to have him on board. I mean, we sent up the smoke signals. Shaw probably calls it the bat signal. But however we did, man, we were able to land him here on the Clearport to talk about one of the most exciting teams right now in this early outset of the NBA season. Our man, E-Dub, he is Eric Walden. He's one of the premier reporters that covers the Utah Jazz for the Lake Tribune. Eric, what's good, man? Have you talked to Danny Ainge yet and really asked him the question, like, what the hell, man? Like, this was supposed to be kind of like a hiatus of work and stuff like that. Have you told him about, this tomfoolery that's going on out there in Utah?
Yeah, I'm a little upset. Like, we were all making vacation plans for May this year, right? Like, wanted things to be done early. Like,
you got to get that PTO in early, man.
Right.
Those dates that you want, they're precious.
I know. My wife every year is like, so we have to do vacation in September, and it's like, yeah, because it's like the season goes on for a while. They make the playoffs, got to do the draft, got to do free agency, and then finally September rolls around. Okay, cool. We got these 3 weeks until training camp starts that we're good. And like, I was looking forward to a longer off season this time. And now all of a sudden it's like, you guys can't even tank properly. Like, what is going on?
Yeah. And listen, Danny Ainge, man, this is what happens when you get a Danny Ainge. Listen, we dealt with it when out near in Boston. You know what I'm saying? If not for him, the baseline probably would not be as vibrant a podcast as it's been for as long as it's been. So we have now handed off the chaos to Utah.
Well, we appreciate that.
All right, so Eric, man, so talk to us, man. The Utah Jazz, as we are speaking, have the best record in the Western Conference. Matter of fact, they have eclipsed. They are better than all of the basically the 10 teams that participated last year in the playoffs, when the expectation is that they're supposed to be utterly like almost the worst team in basketball. So what really is going on out there? And are you all buying into the hype? Is there excitement out there about what you're seeing from the Utah Jazz?
There's excitement just because, I mean, like, this team has been really fun to watch. And you kind of have to juxtapose what's going on now against the team that we had last year, right? Where 2 years ago, it's a team that had the best record in the league, you know, number 1 seed in the playoffs. Everyone's feeling good about like, oh, is Utah finally like a legit title contender for the first time since Karl Malone and John Stockton were playing? And then next thing you know, Donovan Mitchell's spraining his ankle, Mike Conley is pulling his hamstring, and Terrence Mann is making every single three-pointer he's putting up, and that's the end of that, right? Fast forward a year, you're like, okay, they're off to kind of a slow start, and we kept kind of saying, well, you know, they're waiting to flip the switch, as the saying goes, right? Like a year ago, they prioritized getting the number 1 seed, and then it all fell apart as soon as they weren't healthy. So this time, like, they just want to be healthy. They're taking it easy. They're not, you know, they're resting Mike Conley. And we kept just, you know, things didn't appear right, you know, and we just kept making excuses for it, figuring at some point they would find that gear. And then it becomes apparent at some point that, like, they're just not fine. They're not going to find that gear. That gear doesn't exist anymore, right? Like, all of a sudden you realize, okay, these bad vibes that have been kind of lingering, this dark cloud that's been kind of hanging in the background, like, it's legit, right? Like, and it's causing problems, and the chemistry is not there, and it's affecting, you know, the on-court product. And finally, you know, like, Quin Snyder's like delivering a 19-minute rant to explain why them blowing 20 double-digit leads is not really a problem, right? And it's like, what are we talking about? Last year's team just had all of that nonsense going on. And so you juxtapose that against a team now that, like, had no expectations on it. You know, in fact, had negative expectations on it, right? Like, everyone assumed this was going to be a squad that was like competing for the rights to draft Victor Wembanyama. And all of a sudden they're going out and playing hard every night. They're playing with energy. They're forcing turnovers. They're whipping the ball around, you know, 30 assists a night. And it's fun, right? This team has unexpectedly been fun to watch. So is that a good thing? I mean, like, in a vacuum, it is, right? Is it sustainable? Maybe not. And so you know, you start to wonder, like, are they doing more harm than good by, like, getting out to, like, this hot start that's not sustainable, and in the process, you know, they're doomed to kind of decline as the season goes along. But in the meantime, they're hurting their draft position down the road by, like, racking up 9 early wins in 12 games. I don't know if it's sustainable. You know, I don't know if this is fool's gold. Like, I think some parts of it are sustainable. Some parts of it, I think they've had a little luck facing teams with injury issues. They've had a little luck, you know, with 3-point shooting variance. Like, you know, they played the Clippers the other night, and, you know, we referenced Terrence Mann hitting everything in the playoffs 2 years ago, right? Well, the other night, the Clippers missed their final 17 3-point attempts. And it's like, not all of that is because the Jazz were playing lockdown defense on every single one of those possessions. So they've been really good in close games to this point, which I don't know that you can count on it continuing. They've seen like Kelly Olynyk and Jared Vanderbilt, for God's sake, making better than 50% from 3-point range, which I don't think is sustainable. They've seen opposing teams being very poor from 3-point range, which is probably not sustainable. So you add all these things up and you're like, okay, the bottom's bound to fall out at some point. But then again, it's like, if they hang on to this roster, if they hang on to Mike Conley, if they hang on to Jordan Clarkson, if they hang on to Kelly Olynyk, they probably do have enough talent to like just not be the horrible team that we thought they were, right? Like we looked at the roster after they trade Rudy Gobert, after they trade Donovan Mitchell, and we're like, it's a mismatched bunch, right? It's a roster comprised of guys who've never been the star on their team, never been the number one guy, like guys who have skill sets but who aren't necessarily, you know, the man. And you wonder, how's it all going to come together when you've got this much newness on the roster, right? Like, you know, you have Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley are the only returning guys in the rotation. You know, the main rotation guys, like, okay, you got Rudy Gay and Udoka Azubuike and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They're like fringe guys, right? Beyond that, you've got Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt, who've played together a little bit in Denver and Minnesota. You've got Lauri Markkanen and Colin Sexton, who played, I think, like 8 games together in Cleveland last year. And like, that's been it. Like, how is that team going to come together? And damn if Will Hardy hasn't like got these guys playing with energy, focusing on ball movement, focusing on forcing turnovers and pushing the pace. And to this point, it's worked.
Eric, that's kind of, you know, you left off right where I wanted to kind of jump in, because coming into this, we did our predictions, and I think like everybody, we're like, all right, well, Utah is going to be bad. But I remember telling my co-host Cal, saying, I was like, well, I don't know if they're bad enough, because they have guys, in terms of the quote unquote bad teams, they have the most recognizable faces of people like, all right, well, you know those guys. But as you alluded to, closing off there, you didn't know how that was going to come together. You didn't know that they were going to form this amazing chemistry. And if I can say one thing, I probably discredited, I was like, all right, first year head coach coming into this situation, despite the recognizable names. All right, that's why it will probably not work, because he's going to have to figure out what the hell to do. You know what I mean? Now being the quote unquote man who's making all the decisions. But to get Markkanen, you know, and I know his nickname is going around now as the finisher, to get him playing at this level right now, they didn't trade, you know, Mike Conley yet. They didn't trade Jordan Clarkson yet. I got to ask, between what Will Hardy's been able to do and what you think Danny Ainge actually wanted this roster to be, again, is this how we finish? Is this like, you know what I mean? Is this, I mean, I think the competitiveness is going to be there, but does Danny Ainge need to basically do more to basically, like you guys allude to, tank in a way that actually puts them in a position to get, you know, viable draft picks in the future? Or as he said, you know what, F it. Let's see what happens here. What are your thoughts so far on that?
Yeah, I think probably the idea on his part was to do like kind of, he didn't want to absolutely bottom out, right? Because you've got a passionate fan base here that even if there's a segment of them that recognize like that tanking is a pragmatic approach to landing a potentially generational superstar who can make you a championship contender for a decade, you've got a large segment of a fan base here that are so accustomed to having a team compete for the playoffs every year that they just cannot accept like an outright tank job, right? I think Dane just looking at that and saying, okay, you know, if we trade Donovan Mitchell for, you know, Lauri Markkanen, a former lottery pick who, you know, looked like an ascending player for a year or two, but has kind of like plateaued, you know, that's something. If we throw in Colin Sexton, who, you know, at his peak had a season where he was averaging 24 or 25 a game, shooting 37, 38% from three, numbers that on paper look impressive. And then you like dig deeper and see that like he's been a net negative for as long as he's been on the court in Cleveland, right? And so like I think he was looking at guys like this and saying, we can like make this look like we're not going outright being horrible, being bad, but the guys, these guys can't possibly come together and be good, right? Like, there's no way when all of a sudden Kelly Olynyk is your starting center and the plateaued Lauri Markkanen is your 4 or your 3, I guess. Jared Vanderbilt, who is like, he's got like a certain set of skills that he does, but like he's not as good at any of them as Rudy Gobert was, right? And so you're taking all these guys who, yes, have tangible NBA skills. And so, like, on paper, it looks like, it's a decent roster. But I think in Danny's mind, there's a reason that he's given a first-time head coach a 5-year contract out of the gate, which is that he expected these first few years to be very bad, and he wanted Will Hardy to have some runway to say, all right, look, we know this is going to be terrible, but we're with you long term. This is going to be a building process. And then the guy he picked to be coach was too good at bringing these guys together and maximizing their skill sets, and I think they're shocked by that, right? And so now they're in a position of, how do we play this? Do we kind of have to like deal with this success now? Like, is the fan base going to revolt if you're like, okay, we've now like gotten the Lakers interested? God bless the Lakers for being this horrible, for being this inept, at putting together just a disaster of a roster. The fact that like the Jazz are trying to tank and they're first in the Western Conference, and the Lakers are trying to compete and they're 2-8 now is just like the most delicious bit of irony in the NBA at the moment. But now Danny Ainge's got to be thinking, okay, like, does Rob Pelinka get desperate enough to say, fine, we'll give you both the 27-29 first round picks. We'll throw in Russell Westbrook, who you can release right away, and we'll give you, Conley, Clarkson, Beasley. The Lakers are screaming, hallelujah, we're contenders again, and the Jazz can get back to like tanking properly. It's easier to do if like you're down the road a bit and you've seen the bottom fall out a bit, and you're no longer dealing with like the high of being the number 1 team in the Western Conference 12 games into the season. The problem with waiting for the bottom to fall out is like, what if you win too many games in the meantime, right? Like, how far out can you string this along before you get to a point of no return where you just won too many games to like have a legit shot at one of those bottom 3, spots that land you the 14% chance at the number 1 pick? It's a slippery slope. Like, is this team like good enough to like just roll the dice and keep everyone together and see where you go and hope that like Minnesota is a disaster and their pick winds up being, the lottery pick that you were hoping for this year? Like, it's an option. I don't know if it's a good one. Like, I personally think we're probably going to see some movement down the road, in terms of moving some of these veteran guys to other teams, just to see Trader Danny like live up to his name and pull the plug on this thing. But you probably can't do it quite yet, just because the vibes are too good right now. Everyone's happy about like, we're moving the ball, we're playing unselfishly, we're way better on defense than anyone expected. So yeah, weird spot to be in right now.
Eric Walden joining us here on the baseline, contributor and writer for covering the Utah Jazz for the Salt Lake Tribune. So, Eric, the running joke right now for a lot of us is that the Utah Jazz only purpose in life is to spoil any aspirations and hopes for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Okay. It just seems like every single time we try to raise the bar for the Minnesota Timberwolves and their ability to be contenders somewhere, somehow. And then this is like around the same time that the expectations were supposed to be down on the Utah Jazz. Some way, somehow, the Utah Jazz comes up with a way to completely upend that whole chaos theory, right? And listen, we can take this back all the way back almost to the days of, before, not before Kevin Garnett, but like a little bit after, Kevin Garnett. It just seems like every single time this happens. So what exactly is it that we are seeing? I don't want to get too much onto the, what they're doing is the impossible, but I am curious from your part, this hard play, is it a byproduct of a team buying in that they want to be competitive and they want to compete? Or is this a byproduct of really how bad or slow a start the Western Conference is when it comes to the top tier teams? Like, if everyone's expectation is these guys are supposed to be arguably 7-4 and higher, whatever the case may be, and they're not, you're saying, okay, I'm waiting for the shoe to drop. Or do you expect this Utah Jazz team to continue this way, regardless of whatever the end game is with Danny Ainge and transactionally what they want to see from the future of the Utah Jazz?
Yeah, if you keep this roster together as it's presently constructed, these guys are at the very least going to go out and play hard and give you a fight every night, right? Like, they don't have the most talented roster. As good as Lauri Markkanen has been, and he was awesome in EuroLeague play, he's continued a lot of that stuff. He's carried that over into the NBA season. He's not like a legit number one superstar. That's just not how this team is constructed. But yeah, I mean, these guys.
Before you finish on that point, though, Eric, and that's the thing that I wonder about. And Shaw, I think I asked you, like, we've had this conversation numerous times about this. I don't know why everyone, and I'm not saying you are, but why is everyone so hardened at trying to push Markkanen in that conversation, in the way that we have conversations about Luka Doncic, or in the way that we want to have about, like, maybe because of the fact that he was considered as a lottery pick, but I've never seen that his temperament exhibited the type of person that you would consider as an alpha. He's someone that you can kind of couple with, along, and you put him next to a veteran and he might find it in him. I think to what you may be getting into a little bit is that time playing in the EuroLeague, I think really helped him. I think if he continued to keep trying to train and play amongst the NBA level, it would have continued to diminish his confidence in him being the quintessential finisher that we're now seeing.
Yeah, so regarding Lauri specifically, like, he's always felt like he's had more to his game than he's been able to show in the NBA. And we saw that kind of unfold with Finland at Eurobasket, right? Because it's like, there he was the unquestioned number one on that team. Like, who's going to take, who's going to take the ball from Lauri Markkanen with the Sousa Yangi? Nobody, right? So he gets a chance to break that stuff out. And then he comes to Utah, and Will Hardy's like, okay, you say you want to, you say you've got all these extra components to your game that you've never been able to show in Chicago or in Cleveland. Like, let's see you do it. And by all accounts, like, from the time he got to training camp, everyone there was just like, oh my God, like, he can do this stuff, right? And so with the Jazz, like, you're seeing him, like, elevate his game because they don't have any other option, right? Like, what's the alternative? Like, Jordan Clarkson is a nice player, but, like, he's got an inherent ceiling to his game, right? And so we're seeing Lauri Markkanen all of a sudden average 22 and 9 because he's getting the chance to do all this stuff, to do all this extra stuff that he never got to do before. But that's also telling, right? Like, here he is finally getting his chance to, like, ball out, to be the unquestioned number one on this team, and he's averaging 22 points a game. So, like, having a nice season, right? Like, fringe all-star worthy season, like, maybe gets named as reserve down the line if his numbers keep up and if the Jazz keep winning, at a moderate pace. But it's like, he's not all of a sudden, like, in this top tier, right? Like, he's not all of a sudden on the level of Giannis or Luka or Jokic or Steph. So the Jazz, lacking a guy on that level, what do? They go out and they say, all right, we're gonna outwork teams, right? Like, we're gonna play hard, we're gonna push the pace, we're gonna move the ball around, we're gonna make it hard for opponents to keep up. Will Hardy said very early on in training camp, I'm running these guys hard because I want them to be in the best shape of their lives because I plan on pushing the pace. And we've seen that, right? Like they no longer have the rim protecting security blanket in Rudy Gobert. And so all of a sudden you're seeing them switch a lot more. You're seeing Jared Vanderbilt, you're seeing Kelly Olynyk, Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, like huge front line, right? And these guys are switchable. They're creating chaos. The Jazz were always among the bottom teams in the league in forcing turnovers and in assists per game under Quin Snyder. And in this first 12 games under Will Hardy, you know, they're among the top 3-4 teams in the league in both of those categories. So they're taking advantage of the skill set that these guys have, and they're seeing where that can get them. These guys have no incentive to tank, right? Like Lauri Markkanen has no incentive to try to be bad out there. Malik Beasley, who's playing for his next contract, has no incentive to be bad. Jared Vanderbilt, who's making $4 million a year right now, has no incentive to like lose a bunch of games. So these guys are coming together under the collective banner of no one believes in us. We've got a chip on our shoulder. We're going to prove what we can do. And they've got just enough talent, and they've had just enough games against opponents missing some superstars that like they're winning games, right? Like you get 2 games against the Grizzlies, one without Ja Morant, one without Desmond Bane, and that's enough for the Jazz to win both those games. You face a Clippers team with Kawhi Leonard sitting out, you've got enough. You face the Lakers the other night, no LeBron, you know, missing 2 other starters. Like it's been a bit fortuitous, but like they're going to take advantage of what they can until someone pulls the plug and makes it impossible for them to continue playing at this level.
I have to kind of follow up with it and saying, because I think we're all, you know, of a certain age, if you will. And if you don't remember the movie Major League, and more or less, where they're like, listen, despite what ownership wants,
chicken.
Are we gonna? I hope this isn't alluding to like them pulling pieces off.
No, we don't want to see that on
and him in a bikini.
Oh.
that would be frightening.
Have to wake up bats. Have to wake up bats. Okay.
But I get that feeling from this team. Yeah, I mean, while the characters don't all line up with, you know, our favorites from that movie, so to speak, the story in some ways seems like maybe it is a little bit, at least for me, it's fun to think about it in that capacity. I want to ask just kind of point blankly, because you see offensive rating 3rd, defensive rating 8th, net rating 4th, right? Sitting atop the Western Conference here as we're recording. Markkanen, fringe all-star. I'm wondering now if this is going to be Markkanen's like Julius Randle season, you know, with the Knicks. You know what I mean? Kind of like that coming out party, but that's the best we ever see of him. Like, what is, of all the things you've discussed in the time that you've been here, what is the single most surprising thing to you? Markkanen's play, the offense, the defense, it just the way Will Hardy has been. If you had to pick one thing, what has been like, damn, of all the things, I didn't see that potentially coming at all.
I gotta say it's the assist numbers, because we looked at this roster. You look on paper, and there's no one on that team other than Mike Conley, who during the course of their career has been a consistent ball mover, right? And even Mike, all due respect to him, like he never averaged more than like 6.5 assists a game during any one season, right? And so we looked at this roster, and it's like, well, man, yeah, Colin Sexton's technically a point guard, but like he's not really a distributor. Jordan Clarkson's always been a gunner. Lauri Markkanen's been, corner 3-point shooter. Malik Beasley, he's a gunner, and so we were looking at this team and it's like, there's a lot of like ISO guys. This is a lot of selfish guys, and not like, I don't mean that like derogatorily. It's like these guys are doing, that's what's been asked of these guys. And now all of a sudden you're getting Will Hardy like saying, we need to move the ball if we're going to have any chance, because we don't have Donovan Mitchell on this team who can get us like ISO buckets consistently anymore. You don't have anyone who's as good at doing that as he was. And so now all of a sudden, Mike Conley, career high in assists, Jordan Clarkson, career high in assists, Lauri Markkanen, career high in assists, Jared Vanderbilt, career high in assists, on down the line. Like, there's a reason these guys are, if you had told me before the season started that this Jazz team would be 3rd or 4th in the league in assists per game, I would have taken that bet. I'm not a betting man. I would have taken that bet, and I would have said that's easy money. Like there's no way that's going to happen. So like to go through each game last night and to be like to have the live stats up there and see them like constantly creeping towards 30 assists per game and doing it consistently, like that's the thing that boggles my mind. I did not see that coming.
I want to throw something in here real quick, and then Shaw, I want you to kind of give me your perspective, and then we'll let Eric chime in on this part. I think, to your point, Eric, I think the thing that really surprises me is how much freedom Hardy is giving these guys to play. I say that not to say and be dismissive of the idea that I think it definitely helped that Rudy Gobert is no longer on this team, that now they are playing, I think, a much smaller version of up-tempo basketball. The ball seems to move and there's more opportunities, thus opening these guys, forcing these guys to now get the next man the ball. Everyone else gets the opportunity to shoot, instead of the game kind of being slowed down. I see a much quicker, more intensified pace rather than everything. And I'm not saying this only because of Gobert. I'm just saying that I think now that you eliminate him and there's this more positionless type style of basketball, there's more assets on the floor for Hardy to play with. But then I think it speaks to something that maybe people couldn't have seen, realized, or maybe didn't appreciate, because the whole idea is that when Quin Snyder was supposed to be the head coach for these years and as successful as the Utah Jazz has been, he's never quite figured out how to get this team to be collectively explosive. It only seems like they were explosive based on the talent that he had access to. So if Will Hardy now has these guys suddenly being a more offensively potent team, regardless of how good or where they've peaked their potential or whatever, I think it speaks to more of him kind of opening things up a little bit, pulling the covers off of it and just saying, yo, let's see how this engine runs. I want to see you guys run. I want to see you guys move up and down the floor. You know what I mean? Like, is that an indictment more so on Quin Snyder because of this? And I'm not saying that it's all predicated on this 9-3 season. I'm just saying, the Utah Jazz actually look like a team that you do want to watch and you kind of want to root for, whether they win or lose. Whereas last year, we're just saying, yeah, well, they're going to kind of fall short no matter how damn good the regular season looks for them. We don't have any faith in them, making it tough on teams when they go into the playoffs. Do you kind of get that sense, Joe?
Well, to me, perspective is everything, right? So I think you're looking at a roster that is vastly different. Like it's just like it's not an apples to apples thing for me. You inject a style now that you're playing to your roster. I don't know that Snyder, had he remained the coach, if Ainge still turns this roster over the exact same way, and Snyder's the coach and not Will Hardy, I don't know that Snyder wouldn't have adjusted to some capacity. But I think there's some indictment that he probably wouldn't have, and maybe would have kind of rested on his laurels. I will say I'm still surprised in some degree that Hardy is not allowing like Sexton to really kind of run wild. Remember, we were having conversations preseason. Oh, he's going to have a breakout season. He's going to be, whatever, probably the most improved player.
Watch for Sexton. I think this was going to be a year that, he really opens people's.
But he's coming off the bench. Like he wasn't grandfathered in that kind of like, hey, tanking mode, so to speak, where they'd bring Clarkson or Conley off the bench. Like they're like, no, Sexton, you'll play your role, figure it out. And
just keeping him in the he's just keeping him on the wraps, or they'll unleash him as the secret weapon.
I guess I mean, there's other things too. Malik Beasley, I'm sure he probably came from Minnesota and was like, yeah, maybe be my time to out here and gun and shine finally after leaving Denver and then going to Minnesota and kind of getting buried. So things haven't gone exactly the way that I think maybe some of them thought they might have. But Hardy's found a way to make that work here in the early part of the season, which I think is probably one of the more unexpected things. Like there's a culture, and there's something to be said about this. As I was even preparing this show, I was like, man, I'd love for us to have an in-depth conversation in some ways about chemistry and how you cannot really predict what that will ultimately look like. And right now, this is a team, as Eric has alluded to, that likes each other. They like playing for their coach, and they're making it work. And I think previous iterations, like say, they don't have any real bearing. I think the real question is, this is where I'll kick it to you, Eric. What from you being around the team, for those guys that are holdovers, so to speak, What do you think is the biggest difference for them? What do you think? How are Conley and Clarkson and Rudy Gay and guys like that feeling, knowing what they went through last year and the early part of this season? Kind of like, is there a mood change and a mood shift for them, knowing that things are maybe opened up a little bit more?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Cal, you made an interesting point earlier, like when you were talking about like the freedom that these guys are playing with, because that's been a consistent theme that these guys have brought up. You know, like we asked Will like early on, like how many plays are you calling? And he's like, I don't really call them plays. Like I installed schemes that I want these guys to run. And if I see the defense playing a certain way, I'll be like, all right, let's get into this scheme. Let's get into this system. And then I let those guys like go out there and like figure out how best to kind of manipulate that, right? How best to kind of take advantage of that. And so many guys last night talking after this most recent win over the Lakers are talking about, you know, Colin Sexton brought it up, Mike Conley brought it up, you know, a bunch of guys down the line. They're like, Will like enables us to just go out there and play free. Like now, if they don't do what they want under like what he wants under like the broad constructs of what he's established, like he's calling timeout, he's cursing you out, right? Like he's not, just because he's a 33-year-old rookie coach doesn't mean that like whatever goes. And clearly, like you're not seeing a team, you know. You're seeing this group kind of navigate that balance between, you know, playing with structure and playing instinctually, right? And so, you know, in terms of the difference between Will Hardy and Quin Snyder, like it's just a philosophical thing, right? Like everyone who I've talked to about Quin Snyder over the last bunch of years from other teams, they're like, this dude is like the most, you know, a beautiful mind in terms of his basketball knowledge, in terms of his offensive system construction. Like every guy who got traded to the Jazz or signed there as a free agent over the last few years is like, this dude's playbook is like dictionary thick, right? Like he's just got option upon option upon option, and everything was just kind of like structured to how he wanted it to be. With Will Hardy, it's more the broad strokes, right? Like, okay, let's during this portion of the game against this defense, let's go with like this general concept. And Mike Conley and Jordan Clarkson, I'm leaving it up to you guys to figure out how best to attack that, how best to like kind of complement your teammates and get them involved and utilize their skill sets. And so it's just kind of a difference in philosophy that, you know, it is kind of based upon not having that Donovan Mitchell guy around anymore who, you know, like, God bless Donovan. Like, we're seeing him star in Cleveland. We're seeing him go off, right? But with that comes an expectation of a certain number of touches, you know, being able to handle the ball a certain amount, getting the ball in certain positions to be able to operate, you know, in preset ways. With this team, you know, playing more kind of like free flow, playing like more amorphous, like you've got the capacity to do whatever the situation dictates. And that's freeing for guys, you know? And so I think we're just seeing that play out as a result of, you know, a shift in philosophy from the coach and him really kind of reacting to the roster that's been given to him.
So Eric, I feel like we could go for a very long time because it's such a great story, but I'll kind of close up my questioning kind of with these two final things. One thing, kind of even go back to Markkanen. And there's a lot that says about playing other places and getting different types of reps and then preparing you to be the player that you're ultimately going to be maybe years later. I think him playing small ball, if you will, or not small ball, playing tall ball really in Cleveland, playing the small forward last year, maybe open up things for him even within in his own mind and understanding what that switch made it look like. Olynyk, kind of a consummate pro, is always going to kind of just do whatever coach is asking. Vanderbilt, kind of similar in all those things. I think it's all kind of working. But one of the underlying themes of our conversation here today is, all right, how long can this really last? Like, what is like the end game here for the Utah Jazz? And I just kind of want to close with this. Obviously, being close to the team, do you hear anything? I know right now we're literally speculating. I'm not asking you to be Woj or Shams or anything like that as well, too. But have you heard anything about, okay, this is this is the time. Because I was listening to another show today. I was like, well, shit, if you're gonna trademark him now, he's at the height of his powers. He'll probably never have any more value. Have you heard anybody sniffing around this Utah team and the hot start and saying, you know what, we would like to get such X player off your hands because they do look like they'd be a great fit for us?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's an interesting question because, like, talking to Colin Sexton last night post game, just kind of like chatting him up. He's like, man, part of the reason that we're all playing this hard is because, like, we hear the rumors every day about, oh, this guy's going to be out of here tomorrow. This guy's going to be included in this deal. Like, they all have like some degree of expectation that this roster as currently constructed is not, going to be the same way for the entirety of the season. I think there are teams out there that you can look at logically that would make sense to acquire Mike Conley or Jordan Clarkson or Kelly Olynyk. We keep going back to the Lakers, like, because they've got that Russell Westbrook piece, because they've got those 27, 29 first round picks, and because they've got the burden of expectation of being a championship contender every year and maximizing LeBron James, you have to, like, always consider them in the conversation for being a potential option. I look at teams that, like, are not at the level they want to be and maybe don't have the most realistic expectations, who maybe don't have the self-awareness of where they're at, and so the reality doesn't correspond with the goals. Like, you look at a team like, say, the Washington Wizards, right? Like, they're perennially a mediocre team, and yet there's always this seeming pressure within that organization to be a playoff qualifier because of the extra money that comes from hosting postseason games, right? And so you look at a team that kind of went through some stopgap moves this offseason to shore up point guard in trading for Monte Morris from Denver and then signing DeLon Wright as a free agent. Well, Monte's been a career sixth man type, like filling in here and there as a starter for Denver. All of a sudden DeLon Wright is out injured for a while. Like, does that make them kind of more inclined to take on, like, the guaranteed money that Mike Conley has on his deal next year? So there's nothing like concrete at the moment that I've heard. I did have a conversation with some Lakers beat writers when they were in town the other day who maintained that, despite this news coming out that, like, if the Lakers are bad, they're definitely inclined to hang on to those future picks. I'm hearing it's not, like, as altogether solid as what's being portrayed, right? Because how can it be when you've got LeBron James on the team and he's aging and he's chasing Kareem and he expects to be in title contention every year? So that's the one that, like, I continue to pay attention to because it just makes too much sense for them not to do something. Not to mention, like, they've got a long and sordid history of making desperation moves that don't really make any sense, but which they think look good in the moment. So that's where my attention is turned to. That's really kind of the only definitive, and it's not even definitive, semi-definitive thing that I've heard. So I'll just say, like, the players on the Jazz themselves, they're enjoying the moment. I think they would be shocked if, like, the roster was the same at after the trade deadline as it is now.
So in other words, you're going to be having lunch with Danny Ainge, and you'll be reporting to us all of the moves that he's planning to make before he makes them.
I will be letting you know about all of the moves that he came this close to pulling off.
Don't do that, Eric. Don't do that.
This close to bringing Giannis to Salt Lake City,
Vibes.
Definitely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was the breakdown. All right, man. We are back. Callie Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and we just had on our man Eric Walden from the Salt Lake Tribune covering the Utah Jazz. And, Shaw, like, one of the things that I appreciate when we have our guests on is that even if you are a part of the media, right, and your intent is that you're supposed to cover your team, you don't come in just only with the intent of just writing about the team. You have a vested interest on what this team is going to look like, what the makeup of this team may represent. And you can even tell, like, even the writers, with what they were covering, with the information and the knowledge that they had firsthand, they had no expectations that this team was going to be good. I'm sure that they probably thought that these guys are going to compete. They're all lobbying for an opportunity to probably have a permanent job here, playing for the Utah Jazz or whatever. But you never say that all of this stuff is what translates into wins. And I think what him and other writers that cover the Utah Jazz are seeing is that there's something about this unit and whatever their motivations are that is helping to drive them to get out the gates early and take advantage of a weekend, very uneven, not, slow start to the Western Conference, but more than anything else, it's allowing us to see some of these players who we haven't seen really come and shine through. And however long that lasts, I appreciate the fact that Eric has kind of highlighted that in the way that Will Hardy has laid things out for these guys to give them the opportunity to compete.
Yeah, Eric's amazing. He has a great podcast, How About This Jazz? So I encourage our fans, listeners to check that out as well if you want more Utah Jazz content. And again, I think as somebody who covers the team, he's measured and he's connected, he's plugged in, and he's not just, saying the things that an employee, if you will, of the organization, because he works for the Salt Lake Tribune, but he's being fair about the assessment and saying, listen, hey, they've had some breaks. And then some other things have just gone innately right in terms of how they prepared themselves and the job that Will Hardy specifically is doing, marketing Conley, Clarkson, the whole nine. So it's just been like the perfect storm of positivity for Utah. But he's also saying, hey, look on the other side of that. There's going to be some rain. Like there's going to be something that happens, and the players themselves are even preparing themselves for that other shoe to proverbially drop, and that they may not be, and probably will not be, the same 15 guys, if you will, that will finish the season, that has this team right now first in the Western Conference. That's just real. And I think, while it's a great story, we have to understand, all right, can it be a sustainable story that's great? And those are the questions that I think this Utah Jazz team and roster are ultimately facing. But Eric gave us some amazing insight, some great nuggets and things I think that we can clip and put out there as well, especially when it comes to the potential trade market. With this, some of the Jazz players that will have some interest for some other teams out there in the league.
But wouldn't it be funny, Shaw, that we get to this particular part of the season, the trade deadline, and the very things that used to frustrate us about Danny Ainge when he had, a stash of picks and, saying, well, if your team is exceeding expectations, shouldn't that mean you do something? So you're showing people that you're buying into, at least moving the team forward. And it was a thing that frustrated us a ton when he was, the president of basketball operations for the Boston Celtics, that he would not help pull the trigger, or, and also general manager, he would not help pull the trigger on certain things at a time when we felt like this was the opportunity. This is the now. He'd hoard these picks and whatever the case may be. So now here we come with whatever he's doing with Utah. And let's just say now he just starts moving bodies all over the place, right? Would that not frustrate Utah fans if they like what they see from this team as constructed, if they are still among the top teams? And, kind of similar to the way that we were looking at the Cleveland Cavaliers. This could be their version, the Western Conference version of the Cleveland Cavaliers, with the way that they can compete and hang with some of these other top-ended teams. If Danny Ainge just starts moving bodies around and stuff like that, we'll feel some kind of way about, what they call a dangerous Danny, I'm saying, pulling the trigger.
I think it's an interesting point he kind of touched on briefly, is the fan base. And it is a passionate fan base. I don't know how much, I don't want to say this just kind of off the cuff, I just don't know how much Ainge cares. And I think in some ways, if you are making those levels of decisions, you take it into a certain level of consideration, but you ultimately have to be pushing the team forward. The fans are not supposed to know. Like they're all opinionated. And, how many fans really can kind of go in there and do the job of any NBA general manager and do it well? So I think Ainge obviously has to just kind of really assess what this looks like. I think the biggest question and potential indictment on this roster is, are they hurting their chances for success or lottery picks past this year. So let's say you don't do anything, and hey, you're a great story. Remember that Phoenix Suns team way back with Jeff Hornacek coaching, and the Morris twins and Bledsoe and Goran Dragic won 48 games, I think it was, and finished 8th or finished right outside of 8th and making the playoffs because the Western Conference was just stupid that year. And then, that really set them back as a result. Is that something that could happen to the Utah Jazz team? Well, you win a bunch of games, but you're not really close to becoming any type of real contender. You're just a great story. And at some point, we're fickle. As media, we're very fickle. We go from you being a great story to, all right, well, now we have expectations. And are those expectations now unrealistic based on the actual talent that's on the roster? So it's a tough position to be in. I mean, I'd rather have all the options at your disposal, like I think the Utah Jazz do at right now. But I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, on what Danny Ainge may ultimately do. But I could very much see this team breaking up at some point, and Ainge not really caring because he feels like, hey, this is what's in the best interest of the team long term.
You think Lauri Markkanen becomes an all-star?
At this stage, you could definitely say he's within that conversation. And what I said in the show is I think he is probably maybe having his Julius Randle New York Knicks breakout season. We're 12 games into it as we record. So, I mean, there's a long way to go, right? But I don't think Markkanen is going to somehow end up as third team All NBA this year. I don't think, he'll probably even end up being an all-star unless there's some injury replacements. But he's having an amazing start to the season. He's proven a lot that he should be relied on to be able to do more than I think he's been given the opportunity to do in years past. And I think it's just a great story, with a player who's kind of coming into his own under the right circumstances at the right time.
All right. Well, listen, all eyes right now are certainly on what the Utah Jazz is doing. And whether or not what they're doing is sustainable. But, much like to what Eric has spoken to, what you've spoken to, and, what I've also alluded to as well, too, this just seems to be the right band of misfits to just cause a little bit of chaos right now in the heart of what's going on in the NBA. And I think we all enjoy it. So bask in the chaos, everybody. Bask in it. Awesome show this week, man. And what can we say, Shaw, man? It's just great having our man Eric on there to kind of help break things down and enlighten us about what's going on out there in Utah.
Yeah, well said. Again, great insight from Mr. Walden. I'd encourage people to check him out, check out his writing, check out his show as well, too. And just watch this Utah Jazz team, man. They're a great story. So if you're an NBA fan, how can you not love what they're doing for however long it lasts? So let's ride the wave, all that jazz, and keep the thing pushing.
Absolutely. All right. Once again, thank you to our man, Eric Walden, covering the Utah Jazz. And as for you guys, man, you know how we roll, man. This is what we do. We appreciate every single one of you for the baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw. We appreciate you guys. We do. Catch up with you